killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei has raised a major question. Should countries be allowed to target and kill enemy leaders during war? Joining us tonight to discuss that very question, we have three guests in studio. Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. John Sitilides, a former U.S. State Department diplomacy consultant and senior fellow for Global Risk Center for the National Interest. And Professor Jeff McMahon, Sekra and White's professor of moral philosophy, emeritus at the University of Oxford. But before we get to our debate, first of all, thank you all for being here. Let's get some background.
Have we crossed the Rubicon when it comes to killing national leaders during war? Israel's targeted killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei has revived a question largely avoided in the modern era. Just weeks earlier, American forces removed Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro from power. There are historical precedents. Soviet forces killed Afghan President Hafizullah Amin in 1979. Brazilian troops killed Paraguayan President Francisco Solano Lopez in 1870. Sweden's King Gustavus Adolphus died fighting imperial forces in 1632. But most of those cases came decades or centuries before the post-1945 rules-based international order. So why haven't these targeted killings been more common in the modern era? Is taking out the heads of countries an effective tool that should be employed, or a dangerous escalation that threatens the rules-based order?
All right, now is time for our deep dive into this very concept. You just met the guests, and I thank you all for being here. We're going to start with each of you getting 30 seconds for the first question with a buzzer, and then we'll be able to take it a few layers deeper. We're going to go in order. We're going to start with Dan on this. Did the killing of Ali Khamenei cross the line, or was it a legitimate target?
You could argue both. It clearly crossed the line because there's a taboo against killing the leaders of other countries, almost no matter what. And it's a taboo that I think is based less on some universal morality and more on practicality, because the leader that orders the killing of another would, by the principle of reciprocity alone, potentially face attempts to kill him or her. So that much is clear. However, I think even if it is a rule that could potentially have exceptions. The obvious one, at risk of instantly losing the argument by Doblin's law, is Hitler. You can't be against assassinations and yet approve of the killing of Hitler, and I think most of us would not have mourned such an outcome. So the question becomes... does the killing of Khamenei actually achieve the stated purpose of changing the nature of Iran? And I fear that we've discovered it does not.
All right, we'll dive deeper, Dan. We got to get next up. We have John. John, what do you have to say on this very question?
Initial answer is it depends. And in the case of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, I don't think that a quote-unquote head of state can hide behind religious garb and then pretend that he is not the leader of a terrorist regime that is imposing a network of terror organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and proxies throughout the Middle East engage in state-sponsored terrorism against the United States and against Europe, and sow mayhem and menace across the Middle East and around the world, and then pretend because he's a head of state, he's free from the threat of assassination. I think it's a very specific case when we're talking about Ali Khamenei. I don't think you'll see this applied in any other situation on the current international landscape.
All right, 30
it's very much a U.S. v.
Sorry.
Iran situation.
John, we're going to come back to you. Jeff,
Sure.
Now let's have a go at it. What do you think?
I think killing Khamenei was wrong. He was a mass murderer, so killing him was not like killing a moral democratic leader. Indeed, killing him could have been justified if there had been a high probability that he would have been replaced by a humane leader who would have brought democracy to Iran. But killing him was predictably ineffective and even counterproductive in producing a better regime in Iran and dealing with terrorism in the Middle East. It's made him a martyr, thus strengthening the regime he led. So I agree by and large with the first speaker and part of what the other speaker said.
All right, so now we're going to get to more than 30 seconds to have what you need to say. The question is there a risk that more nefarious actors may see this as a signal that anyone is fair game? Dan.
I don't think truly nefarious actors needed the signal. But will this create a norm across geopolitics? I don't think it will necessarily, but it clearly lowered the bar. Did Putin require Israel/America to kill Khamenei, however effective or ineffective that turned out to be, in order for him to try to target Zelensky? I strongly doubt it. I fear that we are living in an era where once widely accepted norms, or at least norms accepted across the last 80 years of a rule-based world order, or maybe even since the Peace of Westphalia for the last couple of centuries, last many centuries, I think those norms are slowly being eroded. And of course, the current resident of the White House is himself very much responsible for much of that. But in general, our world is becoming more and more Hobbesian, I fear, and less delicate and polite.
John, what do you have to say on that?
When we talk about the context of the rules-based international order, it's largely a benign fiction that countries agreed to, especially in the post-Cold War era, when we didn't have great power disruption, the type that we see now over the last 15 years by communist China, by imperial Russia, and by a very aggressive, hostile Iran in the Middle East. So we have a very different geopolitical context today than we had several decades ago. And I don't really see this playing out, again, as I mentioned in the initial response, in other areas. This was very specific to Ali Khamenei. I don't see any other, quote-unquote, national leaders that are being targeted by the United States. And as one other writer once put it, murderous regimes will murder. There really is no deterrent against someone like Ali Khamenei, who ordered Qasem Soleimani to kill thousands of Americans in Iraq during the 20 years of the Middle East wars there. And so Soleimani was a legitimate target of the United States. And much of the animus by Khamenei against the U.S. is predicated on what they think is the need for revenge for the execution of Soleimani in 2020.
Jeff.
My view is simply that it is highly useful to have a prohibition, a generally recognized prohibition of the killing of heads of state. And the value of the prohibition is that it protects heads of state who are essentially good, who have been democratically elected. We don't want those leaders to be perpetually vulnerable. I do think that there can be exceptions. You mentioned at the outset, or someone did, that the assassination of Hitler would have been good. The assassination plot was thwarted, and it was primarily domestic rather than international. But still, the killing of a leader of a really evil regime can be an essential part of what is recognized in international law as the occasional permissibility of humanitarian intervention to protect a population from its own government and to protect other states from a rogue government of the sort. So we can't rule it out altogether, but we do need to distinguish between good leaders and bad leaders, and that is a distinction that it is hard for most people to maintain.
But wait, hold on. I just want to just throw a little addition to this, because when we're talking about Maduro, the U.S. didn't kill Maduro. They took him out, and they clearly brought him to the United States. So is that, I mean, is it more of a blurred line of the same line if you're looking at a continuum? Jeff, I want you to go first on that one.
Okay. I do think that, well, in this particular case, what's happened is that a leader of a sovereign state has been kidnapped and brought to another state for criminal prosecution. We should think it permissible in many cases to arrest leaders of states and take them to, for example, the International Criminal Court, particularly if they have been indicted by that court, as we know Putin and Netanyahu have been. I think it would be perfectly acceptable to arrest either or both of them and take them to The Hague.
Dan?
Look, the taboo against assassinations can't be seen, to answer your question, at the same level as whatever taboo might exist against arrests or detentions or kidnappings. It's just not the same level of activity that invokes thoughts of morality. There's no morality involved. You end up arguing about legality, and some people might dispute the validity of anything done by the ICC because they prefer sovereignty over anything else, and you could also go the other way. I would say that, as I started to say in my original comments, just war theory actually, and this evolved over the millennia, it permits the killing of combatants and also of leaders. I don't think there's necessarily a moral issue as much as a practical one. So as regards Ali Khamenei, I am prepared to table a mea culpa. I thought the conditions applied. I thought it was close enough to a one-person dictatorship that the system might crumble if you killed Ali Khamenei. And so in the early days, although I was perfectly well aware of how a line had been crossed, a taboo had been violated, great danger had been courted, I was inclined to celebrate it. And I hoped for a different outcome. Now, it didn't work out that way for a variety of reasons, including the abysmal American failure to plan for the inevitable block in the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iranian system certainly did manifest and prove that evil and toxic though they may be, the system is more resilient than the killing than one person. And in such a situation, the violation of the taboo may not be worth it. When I hear John speak, it sounds to me like he's talking about who deserves to die. Sure, a lot of people deserve to die. And Jeff speaks of how, the world leaders, the ones among them who are both democratic and good should be protected. But that's a minority of the world leaders on the world stage today. So we're back to practicalities. And practically speaking, I don't see that Iran was weakened. A useful taboo was violated. And so I fear and I do this with great reluctance. I fear it might have been a mistake.
Sorry, Dan, to interrupt. We got to give John a chance to pipe in here.
I'm just saying it was a mistake.
Yeah,
I fear it was a mistake.
John, go ahead. I would love you to hear your thoughts overarching of this whole section.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, let me break it down to three subtopics, if I might. On legality, as we know, international law is only enforceable by those countries that are willing to actually enforce international law. There's no international police force. So the international legal framework is only as valid as the enforcement mechanism. And the International Criminal Court is about to be completely abandoned by the United States, which never backed it to begin with, because we're the only country that has troops that are based in dozens of countries around the world, and it would put the U.S. soldier at tremendous risk. So you're going to see a major issue emerge the way Secretary Rubio brought it up several days ago here in Washington. Secondly, on the morality, I say compared to what? I'm not sure why assassinations are unjustified when mass civilian casualties are permitted in invading entire countries when it's a particular leader who is causing the problems in the country or in a region, or sanctions, which are deliberately intended to impoverish millions of people in a country, and why those are morally acceptable, but assassinating the single individual who's responsible for mayhem, for menace, and for threats is not. And practicality, I think it was Jeff that mentioned the point, and I fully agree. Ultimately, the country that is engaging in assassination must take the risk that there's going to be a better outcome. If the outcome is a worse outcome, then it was a mistake to assassinate. But again, I don't see anything else on the international landscape today where anyone else might be targeted for assassination the way Ali Khamenei was, given the fact that he was approving of terrorist operations against his neighbors, against far-flung countries, against national leaders. Remember, it was the Biden administration that prosecuted a Pakistani national in the summer of 2024 and an Afghan national the end of 2024 for attempting to assassinate former President Donald Trump in the United States. So nobody started this except on the Iranian side. And the idea that we're going to let Ali Khamenei hide behind his garb as a Shiite cleric and forget the fact that he's a terrorist leader of a terrorist regime that is trying to impose a nuclear threat on the region and on the world, I think makes this sort of an untenable discussion in many ways.
But
if
John,
we're talking about Khamenei, that's fine.
John,
if we're talking about other national leaders, I don't see that playing out anytime in the near future.
No one here, surprisingly, is saying that he didn't have it coming or there's anything automatically immoral about it. I think to a certain degree, all three of us are in agreement. And the question is, what was the cost? And there is a cost, clearly, to violating a taboo and crossing a line. Was it worth it in the case of Iran? And of course, Khamenei was a terrible evildoer. But we see that Iran, in his absence, is hardly cowed, doesn't seem scared, and their current leaders, if anything, are even more outrageously brazen than he was, and have not only knocked walked back from any of their previous positions, but are entrenching. So I have to wonder whether to invite, because that's what happened, the assassination of Trump and Netanyahu in this case, because that's what they're going to try to do right now, was worth it. It's less clear to me that the answer is yes than it was, sad to say, on February 28th. And by the way, there are other leaders in the world whose evildoing might invite the kind of justice-based assassination that you're talking about, and number one, maybe sitting in a Kremlin.
Jeff, what do you? Yeah, Jeff.
Could I also just add that the description that John gave of Khamenei applies to leaders that he may well approve of, like Netanyahu, who has been guilty of a great deal of terrorism and killing in Gaza and Lebanon and elsewhere, and also controls nuclear weapons. Why should we assume that Netanyahu is entitled to have nuclear weapons and others
how about
not?
this? Because Netanyahu was duly elected in Israel, not just once, but to my regret, many, many times. Netanyahu is not just a democratically elected leader, but his various policies have generally not been aggressive but defensive. You could say he went too far. Look, viewers of I-24 and other channels know, I think, pretty well that I am no fan of Netanyahu. But honestly, comparing him to Ali Khamenei, an absolutely despicable terrorist on the world stage, I think is unwarranted.
And I agree with that, with Dan's perspective.
Jeff.
I think that Netanyahu has been guilty of mass killing of innocent people intentionally in Gaza and the mass killing of civilians in Lebanon. This action has not been essentially defensive. In my view, it has been aimed largely at trying to force the Palestinians to leave Gaza. Israel could have assured its security against what remained of Hamas after October 7th, 2023, by more purely defensive measures. So I do think of Netanyahu as a terrorist, as a genocidaire. He has been indicted by the International Criminal Court. I mean, you can
Emily,
compare
may I respond?
I don't think the comparison is not what I'm most interested in. It is simply saying that if we declared open season on political leaders who are guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and so on, we're going to have to go a lot farther than Khamenei and
Jeff, I don't want to take us down this rabbit hole, but I just have to say, if Netanyahu is a genocide there for responding to October 7th, perhaps in an overly robust fashion, then I wonder if you think the same of Truman for not only Hiroshima but Nagasaki, indeed of Obama for being behind the killing of many civilians in Mosul. You end up having quite a few genocide there.
Truman was guilty of an egregious form of terrorism in bombing and destroying 2 Japanese cities. I think that's very straightforward terrorism, and probably the worst terrorism the world has ever known.
All right, so John, go ahead. You want to say something?
Yeah, I do. And Dan brought up an interesting point with other precedents. Let's keep in mind that President Barack Obama in 2011 ordered military strikes to execute Muammar Gaddafi. I didn't hear anyone in the world complain about potential assassination qualms in 2011 when it was President Obama. It's very interesting that it's taking place today in this context of a Trump-Netanyahu partnership against Khamenei. And again, Jeff, whatever your particular feelings are about Netanyahu, my point is I don't see any foreign government that has now been encouraged by the assassination of Ali Khamenei now deciding that it's okay to target Netanyahu. If anyone wants to target Netanyahu or any Israeli leader for that matter, I don't think they needed the execution of Khamenei for their own green light.
John,
so
I think
see
that's wrong.
any Rubicon having been crossed here. That's my point. And I don't think there's any national leader, including Putin. I don't know of any government leader anywhere in the world that has any designs on assassinating Putin, including Zelensky. So I want to be realistic here about whether there are any precedents, and I just don't see them. I think this is a very specific matter about the so-called supreme leader of Iran.
We would be naive if we didn't realize that we have, in the eyes of the Iranians, validated the assassination of the leaders of Israel and the U.S. They've pretty much said that they would now make that a matter of principle. I don't know even if it would be limited to the current leaders of those two countries. We've opened up a Pandora's box for sure. And the Iranians are now certainly on a mission to exact revenge.
All right, that is all. Sorry, Dan. Thank you all. This was a very, very interesting topic. Thank you again to Dan, John, and Jeff. And please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.